Today I'm going to show you the behind the scenes of me creating a silicone mold from a glass vessel and then using it to create my own custom candle jar. This is one of those projects that's super satisfying and opens up so many creative possibilities. So let's get started. These are all of the items that I'm going to need to create this mold. I did have to do a voiceover because I am in the living room and there's people watching TV and all kinds of noises going on. So I'll just go through what I have here. So I bought this silicone rubber set from Amazon, and there's two parts to it, a part A and a part B that you mix together. It came with the little stirring sticks and gloves, the instructions, and then I have a mold box that I printed on the 3D printer, and it fits the glass jar that I want to make the replica of. The little clips are for holding the mold box together, and we have a silicone mixing bowl and spatula to get everything out. And then I have these additional little items in case I make too much of the silicone mixture, so that I have something that I can make another mold of. So the first thing I did was make sure I cleaned off the area. I don't want any hairs or crumbs getting into any of the mix. And then I got all of the items together that I will be needing, including my little extra pieces in case I had too much silicone created. I need a hot glue gun to try and seal the seams, also a scale to measure it out because you want to make sure you're doing equal parts and following the instructions. And I use this mixer that I also got from Amazon, but then I wind up just using the spatula because it seemed to introduce too many air bubbles to me. So we have our mold box sealed up with the clips, and then we have our jar that I'm going to place inside of that mold box. Once we get everything mixed together, then we pour the silicone right over it. So I'm going to use the hot glue to seal up all around the bottom of the mold to try and prevent any leakage. You want to try and make sure you get as much of it sealed up as possible. I used hot glue because you can easily peel it off, because you do need to take the whole box apart to get the silicone mold out. And then you also want to make sure you glue down the jar you're going to use. Even though it is heavier, it can still float up in the silicone, which would make your mold come out incorrectly. The glue dried up on me, so I had to re-glue it. And you want to try and get it as centered as possible within that mold box. You can buy a mold that's already created on Amazon for a jar. You don't have to make your own custom silicone mixture of one if you already have a jar that you like. To create the silicone mold that we need for this size jar, we need 12.5 of part A and 12.5 of part B, and that's where the scale comes in handy because you need to mix that accurately. So I did part A in the larger silicone bowl and then part B in the smaller one, just to make sure that I didn't over pour either one. And then you mix them together. So here I'm mixing part B into part A. I'm using this little battery operated mixer to ensure I get all of the mix combined, and then I needed a little bit of help because I didn't want to stop mixing. I've never used this product before, so I didn't know how quickly I needed to work with it. And the instructions weren't very clear on how much time you had. So my fiance scraped out the rest of part B to make sure that we got everything out of the bowl and got it all combined. So the silicone into the mold box, and you are going to pour directly into the center of your jar and let it flow around the jar naturally. And that should push out any trapped air. And then wait, depending on the silicone that you get, it can take 4 to 24 hours to fully cure. And I let mine sit overnight. Now, if you have a vacuum chamber, you can use that to degas or remove the bubbles, but I don't have that. And then it was just a small jar, so I just went ahead with the hand mixer and hoped for the best. You can see some of the air bubbles that were coming up, but they all pretty much dissipated all on their own. Now, unfortunately, the mold did leak, even though I put the hot glue on there. I think I missed putting the hot glue on where the clips are, and it did start kind of coming out of that area on both sides. So definitely, if you're going to use a mold like this, make sure that you get that glue all the way around any opening area. So you don't want to touch the liquid even after hours of it sitting there. It looked like it was solid on the top, but I went to touch it and it was actually just completely the same texture, just very liquidy. You don't want to mess up your mold, so don't touch it for 24 hours at least. Now, it did spill on the countertop before I moved it onto that plate, and that was just a little cheapy plate that I don't need anymore. You don't want to use any of your good china or anything, but I'm gonna clean what did dry up on the countertop up, and then whatever's not dried up I'll scrape up once it's dried. The good thing is that the silicone removes from all the surfaces really easily. I enlisted my fiance again to help me take all the hot glue off of the mold the next day once everything dried up. Since some of the silicone seeped out of the sides, it was a little hard to get them to come apart, but we were able to pry it apart with a screwdriver, just a little bit of extra elbow grease, but nothing too serious. So as you can see, the silicone comes off pretty easily off all the surfaces, and then you can see where it kind of seeped through on the side and where it over poured a little bit over the jar. But I'll be able to trim that off. And this is a softer silicone, so it actually after that first time of taking it off of the original jar, it comes off pretty easily. And I did put a little bit of Aquaphor on the interior and exterior of this glass jar just to make sure that this would come out pretty easy. I didn't know for sure if it would, just because of all the ridges and everything, so I wanted to just do what I could to make sure that it would come off easy. But it got all of the detail, and the main thing that I wanted, because I can find jars with these ridges on Amazon, but I couldn't find any with the area for the label, so it got really good detail with this silicone. And then we just used a little bench scraper from DeWalt to get all of the remaining silicone and any leftover mix off of the countertops with our DeWalt bench scraper here. So DeWalt, if you'd like to throw a sponsorship our way, we love your tools. And then I'm just cleaning up all of the excess areas of silicone that, like, this was where it came out through the side of the mold box, and then just cleaning up the very top of the mold to get all of that excess silicone from what will eventually become the bottom of the jar, so you don't have an excess lip once you start to pour the mold. So you just want to be careful while you're cutting this. You don't want to cut into any of the detail of the mold that you need. You just want to cut off anything excess that would create any extra sanding for you once you pour the final product. So I'm just being as careful as I can, just cutting as close as I could to the edge with this X-Acto knife and cleaning up the mold as best as I can. And again, this just helps you with your final product. So now we are ready to pour the new vessel. So we put the mold box back on just to make sure the form holds its shape, even though the silicone feels very sturdy. Just wanted to make sure that it wouldn't create any irregular patterns without it being on there. I tried one with it and then one without it. It definitely needs the mold box. It does seem like you use a little bit more of material, and the sides are not as straight without the mold box. So the outside edge does give a little bit, and I think over time without the mold box it would start to create a different shape. So definitely like the one with the mold box better. So now it's time to create the new jar. Today I'm going to use plaster. This one is called Perfect Plaster, which I got from Hobby Lobby, and I believe you can get this on Amazon. Everything that I'm using, if I can find it on Amazon, I will provide a link for it. But I do like this plaster. It gives a beautiful sturdy finish. It's lightweight and it's a nice natural color. The way I figured out how much silicone I needed was to put the glass jar inside of the mold box, close it up, and then pour water with it on my scale. Now, because it was leaking water when I did that, I did have to still do an estimate, but I just did the closest scale number before the water started to come out of the sides. That's where I got the amount of silicone that I needed in order to create the mold. You will have to do the same thing with whichever jar you use in order to get your part A and part B measurements. And then the same thing is true for the amount of plaster that I thought I was going to need. And I just put the mold with the case on top of the scale and poured water in to get a close enough estimate to how much I was going to need. So now I'm going to start mixing the plaster to pour into the mold. So you always do water first when you're working with plaster. And this plaster has either a 2-to-1 ratio, or you can do it by measurements. I decided to do it by measurement just to make it as accurate as possible. So I pour water into one and then the plaster into the other. So on the first attempt, we poured the water into the plaster mix, and you should definitely go the other direction. It mixes a lot better when you do it that way, and I believe that's what the instructions say. And we wound up pouring more than we need for just this jar, because I also had another mold that I wanted to pour and see how the mixture did in that. Now this is where I say I don't think that the hand mixer was the best tool to use for this, because I do feel like it introduced more air bubbles than needed, and it splashed out a lot more than it needed to. It worked great for the silicone, but definitely not as much for the plaster mix. You just want to make sure that you get all of the mixture combined and they don't leave a bunch of clumps, because it can mess up your form. So here I poured the mold right from the top, and what I've come to learn after doing this now 8 times is you should take it out of the mold box, pour it around the edges of the bottom, squeeze all the way around the mold, shake everything, and use a tool of some kind to vibrate the surface of the thing. We use the massage gun here, and you want to vibrate the surface and the actual mold box in order to release all the air bubbles from the bottom. Because it's a taller mold, the bubbles that would have been down at the bottom of this mold kind of got trapped. So you do see a little of the bubbles coming up and kind of popping as they go through. But you definitely want to do this from the 2 stages. So the first stage that you pour is kind of like a third of the bottom. Squeeze all the way around on that, and then do the shaking, tapping, and clearing out of any bubbles on that level. Then go ahead and pour around the edges of the rest of it all the way up to the top of the mold. That's the best way that we found. And then the second tip that I can give you is to use a little bit of dish soap and water all the way around your mold before you pour in the plaster. And it gives you a great smooth finish with no air bubbles, as well as vibrating and tapping the jar along with the 2-pour method. Now you don't have very long to work with the plaster mixture that you've made, so you definitely want to make sure you have another mold ready to go. And like I said, I wanted to pour this one. So I am pouring this little trinket tray, scraping out the remainder of the plaster that's in there before it dries out to fill that one up. And then we're using the massage gun to continue to agitate the plaster in the candle vessel mold so that we can try and get out as much of the air bubble as we can. You want to probably agitate your mixture for longer than you think you do. If you don't have a massage gun, some people will use a sander without the sandpaper and let it kind of shake the countertop. And again, you can also lift and tap the item on your countertop surface. Just whatever you can to try and get as much bubbles out as you possibly can. Just looking for as smooth of a surface as possible. So now we have shaken all the bubbles that we possibly can get out of the mold. Anything that leaves the surface of the bottom kind of uneven or anything like that, you can sand to get as even as possible and remove any kind of rough textures. And then I plan to use either cork or felt and make feet for the bottom of it. Plaster only needs about 30 minutes until it is ready to be demolded. You can also feel the vessel. If it's still warm, you'll want to let it continue to sit. But if it's cooled completely, then you're ready to demold and take it out of the silicone. So the vessel was ready to go, but the smaller trinket tray needed a little bit more time. So you just start folding down the edges of the silicone mold, and of course the first time is going to be the more difficult time. After this time I didn't need any more assistance with getting the vessels out, but again, this is where you can kind of see all of the tips that I gave you would come in handy, because this one still had a lot of air bubbles that showed through. But if you use the tips with the dish soap and water in the mold and then the 2-pour method, then you have a lot better result. Even though this doesn't look too bad, it kind of looks like travertine. Now that you've gotten it out of the mold, you need to let it sit for at least 24 hours before you try and seal it. But the detail came out great on this, and I really like the finished product. So here is the first, the second. This one's the third one. Now after this one is when I realized that the soap method would work a lot better. And the third one was the one that I tried without the mold box on it. So you can kind of see a little bit of a difference. I can tell in person. The second and the third pour into the mold, I got air bubbles on both of those jars. And I used a little bit of the excess plaster that was in the mixing bowl, and I tried to fill in where the larger air bubbles were and then sand it down, so you can kind of see the difference of it before and after I tried to fix it. Today's a new day and these have dried completely. So I'm gonna use this acrylic sealer that I got from Sienna Studios, ordered through Amazon. And this can be either wipe on or dip for your vessels. And it's supposed to be an earth safe kind of blend, so it shouldn't have any kind of issues when you burn the candle within this jar after using this sealer. Now, I don't know if I have enough to actually dip these in because plaster is pretty porous and absorbs a lot of liquid, but I will try and do the wipe on method. But if I can get it to work where it does not soak in through to the outside of the jar with the wipe on method, then I won't seal the outside of the jars. I will just seal the inside, and that way I won't have to go through an excessive amount of this product. Went to go and pour it on the microfiber towel to go ahead and wipe it onto the interior of the vessel. It did spill out a little bit, but here we go. I started with the top edge, and then I'm just trying to get as much of the interior surface wiped down as evenly as possible. And I don't know why it keeps like spilling right out onto the counter instead of onto the towel. I don't know if I'm just pouring it wrong or if it's just shaking up a little bit too much, but just be cautious when you pour it onto the thing that you know, you don't want to be wasting this. It's not a cheap product. And then make sure that you get all the way down, every surface covered, because like I said, plaster is very porous and it absorbs everything. If you try to pour a candle in this jar without some kind of sealant, all of the wax just seeps right out into the outside of the jar. The jar smells great, but that's not a safe candle to burn, so we want to get it sealed completely. Now you have to let it sit for at least an hour before you come back for the second coat. I'm just going to wipe down any of the additional amount that may have gotten on the outside from it splashing out, because I don't want any uneven finishes either. And I'm just using whatever is excess on the towel to clean up get some on the very bottom of the vessel. This is a second vessel that I'm holding up here, one that has the finish in it and one that doesn't. The one with the finish, without the finish, actually feels really smooth, which could lead you to believe that it would be okay to pour that as a candle, but it will absolutely not work out. So you don't want to just leave it that way again. So now we're going in for the second coat. I tried to do the wiping on, and then I decided to pour some into the jar and do a swirl around method. So that's gonna be the end of this video. Once I get the testing done, then I'll come back and make an update video on how the candles are doing and how we are able to get these wicked and everything. But I did enjoy this process. Sometimes I get a little bit nervous with trying a new thing, but I'm glad that this actually worked out really well. I was kind of nervous about using this silicone because I've never done any of these kind of projects before, but it worked out and I'm glad I went through with it. So if you give this a try at home, be sure to let me know. I'd love to see what you create. Don't forget to leave any questions below on any of the items that we use or any of the troubleshooting. Until next time, bye loves.